David Akubian, Bearwoods Photography. It's a nice December day, actually almost the end of the year, and I'm just replenishing my wood supply. And it sort of hit me as I was chopping wood, splitting logs, that all this is part of prepping. This is prepping for cold weather. It's getting ready for what's to come. And it sort of hit me, how many people actually prep their camera gear before they go on a trip versus waiting to get there and then finding the mistakes. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to make you a camera prepper. How's that? I want to sit and I just want to show you some of the very basic precautions and things that I do to get my gear ready to make sure that there's few, if any, issues when I'm out photographing in cold weather. I'll be in Wyoming in about a week, and I'm looking forward to some really beautiful conditions, but I've been there and it's been minus 37, and I know what works, what doesn't work, and I want to help you get ready for your trip. So why don't we take a break from splitting logs? I'm a little tired anyway, and we'll take a look at some basic things that we can do with our gear to prep for winter. Alright, let's take a break from splitting wood and talk about camera gear in winter conditions. It's a little chilly when I'm not splitting the wood, so I had to put a little bit of a light jacket on. So things are very different, and I've had to explore a lot of the things that can go wrong with digital. With film, it was very, very different. With film, you had to worry about static electricity because the drives on the film wheels and everything else, the motors, would cause static electricity, and you would get this lightning bolt pattern sometimes in your slides, but that's not the case with digital. So let's start with the very basics. What do you need to consider when you're out photographing? Now, this is from my experience. Someone, I'm sure, is going to have some better advice or some different advice, and I would take everything that you hear from everybody and use that as a learning tool and go from there. So first, let's talk about your camera itself. I haven't had any problems with the cameras. When I first started exploring the things that can go wrong, of course, the first thing is battery life. So what I do when I'm traveling, this is a still camera, is I carry plenty of extra batteries. I mean, plenty of extra batteries for the Nikon and the Sony, which I'm taking on this trip. And I typically will either carry them in this pouch in my pocket with a hand warmer or something in there, or just in my pocket up against my skin. Depending upon how long I'm going to be out will dictate how many batteries I take. Because I will leave some in the car. I carry a car charger as well, so in between locations I can charge. So got to keep the camera going. So the battery is the first thing to consider. The only thing that I have found affecting the cameras, and it hasn't happened to me, but this is what people have told me in my research, is your LCD screen can go a little bit blue. It just gets cold looking. So you really have to make sure you're shooting in RAW, or you take into consideration it may look a little bit bluer than normal simply because the cold weather is making the screen a little cold, a little bit chilly. What I tend to use during shooting in cold weather is I prefer to use live view. That's why the mirrorless are great, is because when you put your face up against the camera, you tend to breathe. And when you breathe, you get condensation on the back of the camera, you get condensation on your ball head, you get condensation on the tripod. All of that stuff can freeze up. So I tend to use live view, get away a little bit, zoom in, check my screen for focus, and then that's why I'll use a cable release to release the shutter and everything else. Just to take those extra precautions of staying off of the camera a little bit. When I'm not shooting, I tend to take the camera, I'll put it on a strap, and I'll put it up against my body. I try not to put it right up against my body, but between layers. I'll have a layer on and then an over jacket. I'll put it in there to protect it from the elements a little bit, but I don't want to get condensation built up in it, because as soon as you take it out, condensation freezing becomes frost, and you don't want that. It's very dry in Wyoming. It's not in Iceland, so there's different considerations for both of those two areas that I'll be shooting at in the next month or two. So out west, I don't worry as much about the condensation unless I've got it up against my body. So I avoid that at all costs. When I take it inside, I try to make sure that where I put it is not very close to a fire or something, warm heater or anything like that, because I don't want to get it so warm that it could form that condensation. So that's one thing to take into consideration. Now, with your lens, I tend to shoot most of the time in really cold weather in manual focus. I haven't ever experienced any issues with autofocus, but at the same time, I'm not worried about fast-moving stuff when I'm doing landscape work. So I'm putting it into manual focus. I'm putting it on peak focusing so I can just simply work off of the back of the screen a little bit. Again, I can zoom in, I can check my edges and everything else and get a good idea. Now, the key for your lenses is make sure that they have this weather seal. That is very important because if condensation does form, it's not as bad if it forms on the outside of the camera as it would be as if it forms on the outside of the lens, as it would be if it forms on the inside of the lens. So that weather seal is going to keep it a good, nice seal. If it's snowing, some moisture or anything gets onto it, that moisture's not going to get in there and freeze inside the lens with that weather seal. I use all the Tamron lenses. All the Tamron lenses that I use have that weather seal. So that is just an added benefit and makes it great to use those lenses for me. So one thing that I've had issues with in the past, and thus that's why I switched to the Acratech GXP ball head, is I've had a lot of issues with freezing on the ball head and the tripod. One of the reasons that I like this is there's a lot less metal to get cold and moisture to build up inside. You can see there's very little areas here that moisture can build up, and that's going to allow me to move it around more freely and not have a bunch of moisture that's built up and freezing. Because the one thing that I have suffered from frequently is the ball head freezing up on the tripod. I've had to adjust the tripod to get levels and everything else, and it almost eliminated the idea of doing panoramics altogether. So I really feel confident that the Acratech, I've talked with Scott, the designer and the owner of the company, the founder of the company, and he really sold me on why this is the perfect head for these areas. I promise you I will do a video from out there and I'll show you how well it works. There's very little metal below, so I'm feeling pretty confident that it's also going to avoid any freeze up as I try to do panoramics. I can always flip it and do the panoramic head with this as well. So we're going to see. We're going to put it to the test. We're going to see if it works just as well in cold weather as it does in warm weather. But that is the biggest reason that I switched to the Acratech head, because less metal covering it is going to make it less areas that can freeze up, that gathers condensation. If I breathe on the back of it, there's nothing there that can freeze up. It's minimal. So I'm really looking forward to that. Now with the tripod, if you get moisture, if you've got it in the snow and you put your legs up, so if you've had it down in the snow and you put those legs up and you put it in the trunk of your car, you take it inside your cabin or whatever you're doing, your hotel room, then you go back outside, that condensation that was on those legs that got inside froze up, and it's going to be an absolute pain in the butt to get those legs to move freely. It's going to be very frustrating. You're going to be wearing gloves. One of the things that I do is sometimes I'll take this, the W2204 from Surrey, which is waterproof. It has extra seals so that condensation shouldn't get up in those legs. But regardless of which tripod I'm using, when I get back to my cabin or my hotel room, I will extend the legs out all the way. I'll take a towel and I'll dry them off really well. Same thing with the center column if I've got one on, and this one I don't. The SR3204, I don't either. But I make sure that all of those areas that could possibly have some type of condensation buildup, that's not going to be an issue. That has been the #1 issue that I have found while I'm photographing in the cold. The coldest it's been where I've been photographing was -37 degrees with a nice breeze. I don't know what the wind chill factor was that morning. And I had major tripod and ball head issues because I was using a bigger metal ball head, which for the summer was great, but for the winter was a disaster. So the other thing you need to keep in consideration is coffee. I carry a little thermos, clean canteen with coffee just to keep me warm, because if I'm not happy, my photography's not happy. I carry everything inside of either the Shimoto Explorer 40 liter bag or the 30 liter bag, depending upon which one I've got. Sometimes I'll carry a smaller bag. I hope you've enjoyed these winter tips and you're prepping, just like I am with firewood, to get ready for your next winter trip with your camera. I do ask that if you like what you've seen in the video, you like the content, go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up. If you want to get notifications when I'm posting a new video, there's a bell down in the corner. You can just ring that bell, and every time I post, you'll get notification. Thank you, and have a great winter. Hopefully you get out and do some photography, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of your images.